The cloth hit the dirt floor with a sound softer than a whisper, but louder than thunder in that moment. Violet Warren stood there trembling, waiting for disgust to fill his eyes. But Apiatan, the warrior who had killed men with his bare hands and never flinched, felt something crack inside his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with fury. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It pounded the Texas plains like God himself was trying to wash something filthy off the earth. But some stains don't come out with water. Some stains live inside you, growing darker with every breath you take, burrowing deeper into the places you try to keep hidden from the world. Violet Warren sat in the corner of the covered wagon, knees pulled to her chest, her wedding dress still on. White silk, now mud-stained and torn at the shoulder where his hands had grabbed too hard. She hadn't chosen this dress. Hadn't chosen the lace or the pearls sewn into the bodice or the veil that made her look like something pure and untouched. Hadn't chosen the man either. But her father had gambling debts that needed paying, and in 1867 Texas, daughters were currency, traded and bartered like cattle at market. His name was Clayton Mercer, owned half the county, or so he claimed. Big man with a bigger voice, loud laugh that filled every room he entered, always smelled like expensive whiskey and Cuban cigars. The kind of man who shook hands too hard and smiled too wide, the kind who made other men nervous and women look away. He smiled when he shook her father's hand over cards in Chiyue, smiled when he signed the marriage papers with a flourish, smiled when he locked the bedroom door on their wedding night, and the sound of that lock clicking shut was the loudest thing Violet had ever heard. She didn't scream. Screaming would have made it real somehow, would have given sound to the thing she was trying to pretend wasn't happening. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. 23 of them, each one a different shape. Each one something to focus on, that wasn't his breath hot against her neck, or his weight crushing her chest, or the way he kept saying her name like it was a possession he'd just acquired. Like she was property with a title deed. When it was over, he rolled off and poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the nightstand. Didn't look at her, didn't ask if she was all right, didn't apologize or show even a flicker of concern for the tears streaming down her face. Just drank his bourbon neat and said, "You'll get used to it," like she was a horse being broken in. Like her body was something wild that needed taming, something to be trained into submission. She waited until he passed out. The bottle was empty by then, his snoring loud enough to shake the bed frame, the smell of alcohol seeping from his pores. She pulled on the first clothes she could find with shaking hands, men's trousers and a cotton shirt from his wardrobe because her wedding dress was ruined and she couldn't bear to touch it again. She took nothing else. No money, no food, no supplies. Just herself and the desperate need to be anywhere but there. She ran. The rain started an hour into her escape. Cold, punishing, turning the roads to rivers of mud that sucked at her bare feet. She didn't know where she was going, had no plan, no destination, just away. Away from him. Away from the house that smelled like leather and tobacco and her own helplessness. Away from the life her father had sold her into for the price of his debts. Her feet were bare, cut up from rocks and thorns and broken glass, blood mixing with mud, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking into so many pieces she'd never be whole again. By the second day, she was half dead. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a living thing with teeth. Thirst made her tongue thick and useless, her lips cracked and bleeding. She collapsed near a creek, drank until she threw up, then drank some more, not caring if the water was clean or contaminated. The sun came out briefly, just long enough to burn her shoulders raw and blister her nose, before the clouds rolled back in, dark and heavy with the promise of more rain. She stumbled through mesquite thickets that tore at her clothes and cactus patches that left needles embedded in her palms. Her vision blurred, doubled, turned the landscape into something dreamlike and unreal. Maybe she was dying. Maybe that would be easier. Maybe she could just lie down in the dirt and let the earth take her back, return her to dust and silence. That's when she saw the smoke. Thin grey rising from beyond a ridge about a mile west. Smoke meant people. People meant food, shelter, maybe mercy if she was lucky. She dragged herself to her feet, every muscle screaming in protest, and walked. One foot in front of the other. Just keep moving. Just survive one more hour, one more minute, one more breath. The camp was small. 5 teepees arranged in a careful circle, horses tied nearby with woven rope, a fire crackling despite the damp wood. And standing near that fire, arms crossed over a broad chest, watching her stumble into his world like a ghost made flesh, was Apiatan. He was Comanche. She knew that immediately, had heard enough stories growing up to recognize the way he stood, the way his eyes tracked her every movement, like a predator assessing prey, the way his hand rested on the knife at his belt without aggression, just readiness. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of survival. His hair was long and black as midnight, streaked with a single braid, wrapped in leather and adorned with small bones. His face was hard, carved from stone and old scars, a life of violence written across his features. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, calculating, the eyes of a man who missed nothing. Violet stopped 10 feet from him. Her legs shook so badly she thought they might give out. Her vision blurred again, dark spots dancing at the edges. But she forced the words out through cracked lips. "Please, I need help." Apiatan didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her like she was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. A variable in an equation he was still working out. One of the other men, younger, with anger burning in his dark eyes, stepped forward and said something in Comanche. Fast, clipped, clearly hostile. His hand moved toward his weapon. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd run from one monster only to stumble into another nightmare. But Apiatan raised one hand, a single gesture, subtle but absolute. The young man went silent immediately, stepped back, deferred. Authority, unquestioned and earned through blood. Apiatan finally spoke. His English was rough, accented, each word carefully chosen. "You run from something, it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact." Violet nodded. Her throat was too dry for more words, her voice barely a whisper. "You bring trouble here," Apiatan said. Still no emotion in his voice. "Just observation, calculation, assessment. I didn't mean to," Violet whispered, her voice breaking. "I just needed somewhere safe." "Safe," Apiatan repeated, like he was testing the word on his tongue, examining it for truth. Then he looked past her, scanning the horizon with eyes that had tracked game and enemies across these plains for decades. "Who follows you?" "My husband," she said, and the word tasted like poison on her tongue, like something rotten she wanted to spit out.
"Clayton Mercer."
"He owns land near Fort Griffin. He'll come looking." The young warrior spat on the ground at the name, contempt and hatred mixing in that single gesture. Clearly, they knew who Mercer was. And clearly, they had their own reasons to hate him. Apiatan studied her for a long moment. His gaze moved over her torn clothes, her bloody feet, the bruises visible on her arms and neck, the hollow look in her eyes. He saw everything, missed nothing, and whatever conclusion he reached, he kept it locked behind that stone face. Then he pointed toward one of the teepees with a scarred hand. "You sit, eat, we decide after." It wasn't kindness. It was practicality. But Violet would take it. She nodded, stumbled toward the teepee on legs that barely held her weight, and collapsed just inside the entrance onto soft furs that smelled like smoke and sage. An older woman appeared moments later, gray-haired with silver streaks like lightning, face lined with age and wisdom earned through survival, eyes that saw too much and judged accordingly. She didn't speak English, but she brought food without being asked. Dried meat that Violet's stomach desperately needed, some kind of flat bread made from ground corn, water in a leather pouch that tasted like salvation. Violet ate like an animal, barely chewing, her body so desperate for fuel that her hands shook as she stuffed food into her mouth. The woman watched her with something that might have been pity, or might have been recognition. Then she touched Violet's shoulder gently. Her torn shirt, the bruises visible beneath the fabric, dark purple and yellow marks in the shape of fingers. She said something soft in Comanche, words Violet didn't understand but felt in her bones. shook her head with sadness and left. Violet sat there alone, surrounded by people who owed her nothing and had every reason to send her away or worse. But they hadn't, not yet, and that was something. That was more than she'd had an hour ago. Outside she could hear voices rising and falling like wind through grass. Apiatan's deep and commanding, a voice used to being obeyed. The young warriors sharp and angry, full of justified rage. Another man, older with a voice weathered by time, calmer but firm. They were arguing about her. She didn't need to understand Comanche to know that. She could hear her fate being decided in words she couldn't comprehend. She wrapped her arms around herself, tried to make herself smaller, invisible. Tried not to think about what would happen if they sent her back. Tried not to imagine Clayton's face when he found her, the rage that would be there, the punishment he would devise. Tried not to feel the phantom weight of him still pressing down on her ribs, stealing her breath. The flap opened with a rustle of leather. Apiatan stepped inside, his large frame filling the space. He crouched down so he was at eye level with her, close enough that she could see the scars on his face up close, a life of battle written in raised white lines. His expression was still unreadable, carved from granite, but there was something different in his eyes now. Not softness, never that, but recognition. Like he'd seen this before, like he knew what running looked like, what desperation smelled like. "You stay," he said simply, each word deliberate. "For now." Violet exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding, relief flooding through her so intensely her eyes burned with tears. "Thank you." Apiatan shook his head sharply, rejecting her gratitude. "Do not thank me. This is not kindness. This is strategy. Mercer is enemy of my people. Has been for many years. You are a weapon against him whether you know it or not." "I don't want to be a weapon," Violet said quietly, her voice small and broken. "I just want to be left alone." Apiatan's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath scarred skin. "No one is left alone. Not in this world. Not anymore." He stood to leave, unfolding his tall frame, but Violet's voice stopped him at the entrance. "Why did you help me?" "Really?" Apiatan looked back at her over his shoulder. For the first time, something flickered across his face, broke through that stone mask. Not pity, something harder. Something that looked like old, buried rage that had been fermenting for years, waiting for release. "Because I know what men like Mercer do," he said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "And I know what it looks like when someone survives them. I know the eyes. I have seen them before." Then he was gone, the leather flap falling closed behind him, leaving Violet alone with her thoughts, and the distant sound of rain still hammering the earth like fists against a door. She slept for 14 hours straight, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion that went bone deep. When she woke, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight filtered through the teepee's opening, warm and soft and golden, painting everything in shades of amber. Her body ached everywhere, muscles she didn't know she had screaming in protest, but the sharp edge of panic had dulled to something manageable. She was still alive, still breathing, still free. For now, the older woman returned with more food and a carefully folded bundle of clothing. Traditional Comanche dress. Soft deerskin leather worked until it was supple as cloth, decorated with small beads in geometric patterns, simple but well made with careful hands. She gestured for Violet to change with a gentle smile, then stepped outside to give her privacy, something Violet hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. Violet stripped off the torn, muddy clothes she'd been wearing, Clayton's clothes that still carried his smell. Stood there naked for a moment in the dim light, looking down at her own body like it belonged to someone else, like she was examining a stranger. The bruises on her thighs, dark and angry, the scratches on her ribs that were starting to scab over, the ache between her legs that hadn't faded yet, might never fade, a permanent reminder of what had been taken. She pulled on the dress quickly, trying not to think, trying not to feel, trying not to remember. But her hands were shaking again despite her best efforts, and her breath came too fast, and suddenly she was back in that bedroom, back under him, back in the moment where everything was stolen and nothing would ever be the same. "No," she whispered to herself fiercely. digging her nails into her palms until it hurt. "Not here, not now. You're not there anymore." She forced her breathing to slow with an old trick her mother had taught her years ago. Forced her hands to still by pressing them flat against her thighs. She'd survived. That's what mattered. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine, and she'd keep surviving, one breath at a time, one moment at a time, for as long as it took. When she stepped outside, the camp was alive with activity that hadn't been there during the rain. Children running between teepees, their laughter bright and innocent. Women working on stretched hides with curved knives, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. Men checking weapons and horses with careful attention, preparing for whatever came next. And in the center of it all, like the sun everything orbited around, was Apiatan, speaking with two other warriors in low, serious tones. He saw her immediately, his gaze sharp and assessing, missing nothing about how she moved or held herself. He walked over with that predator's grace, economical and purposeful. Stopped a respectful distance away, giving her space she desperately needed. "You are stronger today." "I'm standing," Violet said, wrapping her arms around herself. "That's not the same thing." "It is the beginning," Apiatan said, his dark eyes studying her face. Then, after a pause, waited with meaning. "Come, walk with me." It wasn't a request. But it wasn't a command either. It was something in between, an invitation that could be refused. Violet followed, curious despite herself. They walked to the edge of the camp where civilization ended, where the land opened up into rolling plains dotted with mesquite and cactus and endless sky. The landscape stretched forever in every direction, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving all at once. The sky was impossibly blue, washed clean by 3 days of rain. So bright it almost hurt to look at. "You cannot stay here forever," Apiatan said without preamble, his voice matter-of-fact. "You understand this." "I know," Violet said quietly, her heart sinking. "Mercer will come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he will come. Men like him do not let things go. They believe the world owes them everything." "I'm not a thing," Violet said, sharper than she intended, some spark of her old self flaring to life. Apiatan glanced at her, and there might have been approval in his eyes. "I know, but he does not. To him, you are property. Property that has run away." Silence stretched between them like rope pulled taut. Then Violet asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "What will you do when he comes?" Apiatan's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to the knife at his belt, fingers wrapping around the worn leather handle with easy familiarity. "What I always do with men who take what is not theirs." There was no bravado in his voice, no posturing or empty threats, just cold, hard certainty. The voice of a man who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation when necessary. Violet looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. This man who owed her nothing. This man, whose people had been hunted, killed, driven from their lands, pushed to the edges of existence by men who looked like her father and her husband. This man who had every reason to hate people with her skin, her language, her blood. "And yet, why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why fight for me?" Apiatan was quiet for a long time, so long Violet thought he might not answer. They kept walking, their feet crunching on dry grass and small stones. Then he stopped, turned to face the horizon, and spoke. "When I was young, barely 14 winters, soldiers came to my village, blue coats with rifles and hate in their eyes. They took my sister. She was 12 winters old, small, scared. They took her into their camp." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Violet could hear the rage buried beneath like magma under stone. "We found her 3 days later by the river. She had walked into the water with stones in her pockets. Did not come out." Violet's chest tightened so hard she couldn't breathe. Tears burned her eyes. "I do not fight for you," Apiatan continued, his voice still deadly calm. "I fight because men like Mercer are the same everywhere. Different faces, different uniforms, different excuses. Same poison, same disease. They take and take and take, and they think the world will let them." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw real emotion crack through that stone mask. Fury, ancient and justified. You ask if you are worth fighting for. Wrong question. The question is whether I am the kind of man who looks away when I see what I have seen before. And I have already been that man once. Never again. Violet didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to carry the weight of what he'd just shared, the trust implicit in telling her his deepest wound. So she just nodded, her throat too tight for words. They walked back to camp in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, comfortable, understanding. She wasn't just a refugee anymore, a problem to be solved. She was a choice, his choice, and somehow that mattered more than anything. That night, sitting by the fire with flames casting dancing shadows across faces, Violet watched Apiaton sharpen his knife with slow, methodical strokes of a whetstone. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost meditative, the scrape of stone on metal like a heartbeat. He didn't look up when he spoke, his attention focused on the blade. "Tomorrow you learn to defend yourself." Violet blinked, surprised. "What? You cannot run forever. Running only works until something faster catches you. You must learn to stand, to fight back." "I don't know how to fight," Violet said, fear creeping into her voice. "Then you learn," Apiatan said simply, testing the blade's edge with his thumb. "Or you die next time. Your choice." It should have sounded harsh, cruel even. But somehow it didn't. It sounded like the first real option she'd been given in months, the first choice that was actually hers. Not her father's, not Clayton's, hers. Violet stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker and consume the wood, turning solid matter into ash and smoke. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Clayton Mercer was looking for her. Somewhere out there, the life she'd run from was waiting to drag her back into that bedroom, that prison, that slow death. Somewhere out there, men with guns and authority and the law on their side were planning how to retrieve stolen property, Dusmarg. But here, in this camp of people who understood survival in ways most never would, with this scarred warrior who saw her as something more than a victim or a possession, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something she thought was dead and buried, hope, small, fragile, easily crushed, but real, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. Dawn came cold and unforgiving. Violet woke to the sound of camp already stirring, voices low and purposeful, the smell of mesquite smoke and something cooking over the fire. Her body still ached, muscles protesting every movement, but it was a different kind of pain now. Not the pain of violation, but the pain of survival. The kind that reminded her she was still breathing. She stepped outside the teepee into air, so crisp it stung her lungs. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the sun just beginning to crest the horizon. Apiatan stood near the fire, speaking with an older warrior whose face was a map of wrinkles and scars. They both turned when they heard her approach. "You eat first," Apiatan said, gesturing toward a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew. "Then we begin." Violet took the bowl with hands that were steadier than yesterday. The stew was simple, meat and wild onions and something bitter she couldn't identify, but it was warm and her stomach welcomed it. She ate standing up, watching the camp come fully alive around her. Children were already playing, their laughter cutting through the morning chill. Women were preparing hides, their knives moving with the kind of precision that came from a lifetime of practice. This was a community, a family, something she'd never really had even before Clayton Mercer bought her like livestock. When she finished eating, Apiatan motioned for her to follow. They walked away from the camp, beyond the horses, to a flat area ringed by cottonwood trees. The ground was hard-packed dirt, scattered with small stones. He stopped in the center and turned to face her. "What do you know of fighting?" he asked. "Nothing," Violet admitted. "Women aren't supposed to fight. We're supposed to be quiet and obedient and grateful for whatever protection men choose to give us." Apiatan's expression darkened. "That is how they keep you weak, how they make sure you cannot resist." He pulled his knife from its sheath, the blade catching the early morning light. "This world does not care what you are supposed to be. It only cares what you can survive." He flipped the knife, caught it by the blade, and extended the handle toward her. Take it, Violet hesitated. The knife looked heavy, dangerous, capable of ending a life. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Do not be afraid of the weapon, Apiatan said. Be afraid of not having one when you need it. She took the knife. It was heavier than she expected, the leather-wrapped handle warm from his grip. She held it awkwardly, unsure where to put her fingers, how tight to squeeze. Apiatan moved behind her, his presence solid and steady. Your grip is wrong. You hold it like you're afraid it will bite you. His hand covered hers, adjusting her fingers, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone so clearly capable of violence. Firm but not desperate. The knife is an extension of your arm, not a separate thing. He stepped back, circled around to face her again. Now try to cut me. Violet's eyes widened. What, no, I can't. You can, and you will, or you learn nothing. His voice was patient but firm. I will not hurt you. But you must try to hurt me. Understand? She understood, even if every instinct screamed against it. She lunged forward clumsily, the knife extended like she was trying to hand it to him rather than use it as a weapon. Apiatan sidestepped so easily it looked like he hadn't moved at all. She stumbled, nearly fell. Again, he said. She tried again, and again, and again. Each time, he avoided her with minimal effort. Sometimes not even bothering to move his feet, just shifting his weight or turning his shoulders. It was humiliating, frustrating. She was breathing hard within minutes, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. You think too much, Apiatan observed. You plan the attack in your head, and by the time your body moves, I have already seen it coming. You must learn to let your body think for you. I don't understand, Violet panted, wiping sweat from her eyes. Your mind is slow, full of doubt and fear and questions. Your body is fast. It knows how to survive. You must trust it. He moved closer, within striking distance. Try again, but this time do not think. Just move. Violet closed her eyes for a moment, tried to quiet the constant chatter in her head, the voice that told her she was too weak, too broken, too ruined to be anything other than a victim. When she opened them, she moved. The knife came up fast, instinctive, aiming for his side. Apiatan blocked with his forearm, the impact jarring her wrist, but there was something different in his eyes now. Approval. Better, he said. Again. They trained until the sun was fully up, until Violet's arms burned and her legs shook and she could barely hold the knife anymore. Apiatan was relentless but never cruel, correcting her stance, her grip, her footwork with the patience of someone who understood that survival skills couldn't be rushed. When he finally called a halt, Violet collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving. You did well, Apiatan said, offering her a water skin. For a first day. I didn't land a single strike, Violet pointed out between gasps. No, but you tried. That is what matters. The strikes will come with time. He sat down beside her, close enough to talk quietly, but far enough to give her space. You are stronger than you think. Your body knows this. Your mind does not yet believe. Violet took a long drink, the water cool and perfect. How long did it take you? To learn to fight. My whole life, Apiatan said simply, and I am still learning. The moment you think you know everything is the moment someone faster or smarter kills you. He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. But you do not need to be the best fighter. You only need to be dangerous enough that men think twice before touching you. The words settled into Violet's chest like stones. Dangerous. She'd never been dangerous. She'd been pretty, obedient, marriageable, all the things that made her valuable to men and powerless to herself. They walked back to camp together. Violet's legs were unsteady, her whole body screaming for rest, but there was something else too, something that felt almost like pride. She'd spent the entire morning trying to hurt someone, and instead of feeling guilty or ashamed, she felt more alive than she had in months. The older woman, the one who'd brought her food and clothes, approached with another bowl of stew and a knowing smile. She said something in Comanche, her tone warm and approving. Apiatan translated, she says you move like a newborn deer, all legs and no balance. But every deer learns to run. Violet found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. Tell her thank you. For everything. Apiatan spoke to the woman in Comanche, and she responded by touching Violet's cheek gently, the gesture so maternal it made Violet's throat tight. Her own mother had died when she was 12, and her father had remarried quickly to a woman who saw her as competition rather than family. This simple touch carried more affection than she'd felt in years. That afternoon, while Violet rested in the shade of her teepee, she watched the camp's rhythm. The children played games that looked like training exercises, disguised as fun, throwing sticks at targets, wrestling in the dirt, learning to move quietly through tall grass. The women worked, but also laughed, their hands never idle, their conversation flowing like water. The men maintained weapons, checked horses, discussed things in low voices that carried the weight of serious decisions. This was a life built on the edge of extinction. She could see it in the way they watched the horizon, the way weapons were always within reach, the way even the children knew how to be silent when adults made certain gestures. These people lived with the knowledge that everything could be taken from them at any moment. And yet they still laughed, still loved, still fought to survive. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, a rider appeared on the eastern ridge. Every adult in camp noticed immediately, hands moving to weapons, bodies tensing. But Apiatan raised his hand in a gesture that meant wait, and the tension eased slightly. The rider approached slowly, hands visible, making it clear they meant no immediate threat. As they got closer, Violet could see it was a young Comanche man, maybe 18 or 19, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. He spoke rapidly to Apiatan, gesturing back the way he'd come, his words urgent. Apiatan's face remained impassive, but Violet saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his hand moved to his knife. When the young rider finished speaking, Apiatan gave a curt nod, and the boy rode off toward the horse line to tend his mount. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What is it? Violet asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Apiatan looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something like concern in his eyes. Mercer has sent men, 6 of them. They are in the town of Cedar Springs, asking about a runaway wife. Offering money for information, Violet's blood went cold. That's only 20 miles from here. I know. Apiatan's voice was calm, but his eyes were calculating, already planning. They will hear stories of a white woman in a Comanche camp. They will come. Then I should leave, Violet said, standing up despite her exhausted legs. I should go somewhere else. I won't let you risk your people for me. Sit down, Apiatan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Violet sat. You leaving accomplishes nothing. They will still come. And now they will be angry, and my people will have no reason to stand between them and their anger. He crouched in front of her, his eyes locked on hers. You are here now. You are under my protection. That means something. It means I do not give you away like a coward. But your people, my people, have been fighting men like Mercer since before you were born. We know how to survive. We know how to fight. And we know when to make a stand. He stood, looking toward the horizon where the rider had appeared. 6 men is not an army. 6 men is an insult. Mercer thinks we will be frightened by his hired guns. He's wrong. That night the camp's mood shifted. The laughter grew quieter. The men gathered in a circle, speaking in low tones, checking weapons with extra care. Apiatan stood in the center, clearly the leader, his voice carrying authority that needed no volume. Plans were being made, defenses prepared. Violet sat by the fire, the older woman beside her working on a piece of leather, her hands moving with automatic precision. The woman spoke without looking up, her Comanche soft and rhythmic. Apiatan, passing by, translated without being asked. She says you remind her of her daughter. Same fear in the eyes, same strength underneath that does not know itself yet. What happened to her daughter? Violet asked quietly. Apiatan hesitated, then spoke to the woman in Comanche. Her hands stilled. When she answered, her voice carried old grief, the kind that never fully heals. Apiatan's translation was gentle. Cholera. 10 winters ago. She was 16. Violet reached out, placed her hand over the older woman's weathered one. No words needed translation. Grief was a language everyone spoke. Later, when most of the camp had retired to their teepees, Apiatan found Violet still sitting by the dying fire, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. He sat down beside her without invitation, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. "You are afraid," he observed. "Of course I'm afraid," Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Men are coming to take me back to him, back to that house, that bedroom." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I can't go back. I'd rather die." "You will not die. And you will not go back." Apiatan's voice carried absolute certainty. "I have made a promise. I do not break promises." "Why?" Violet turned to look at him, this man who was still largely a mystery to her. "Why does it matter so much to you? You said it wasn't kindness. You said I was a weapon against Mercer. But it feels like more than that." Apiatan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "When my sister died, I was angry at everyone. Angry at the soldiers. Angry at my father for not protecting her. Angry at myself for not being there." He paused, the firelight casting shadows across his scarred face. "But most of all, I was angry at the people who saw what was happening and did nothing. The traders who sold the soldiers whiskey. The townspeople who knew what those men did to our women and closed their doors. The other tribes who thought if they stayed quiet, the soldiers would leave them alone." He turned to look at her. "I swore then that I would never be one of those people. I would never look away. I would never close the door, even if it cost me everything." His hand moved to touch the scar on his cheek, a long white line that ran from his temple to his jaw. "This I got from keeping that promise. I have others. I will get more. But I will still keep the promise." Violet felt tears burning her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't know how to repay you. You do not repay. You live. You learn to fight. You become the woman who does not need protection." He stood, tall and imposing against the night sky. "That is how you honor what is given." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "Tomorrow we train harder. The day after, harder still. When Mercer's men come, you will not hide in a teepee. You will stand with us. You will show them that you are not property that can be retrieved. Understand?" Violet nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Good," Apiatan said. Then softer, almost gentle, "Sleep now. Vir is useless without rest." He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Violet alone with the dying fire and thoughts that raced too fast for sleep. Somewhere out there 6 men were coming. 6 men with guns and authority and the law on their side. 6 men who thought they could just take her back like she was a stray horse. But maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. She went to her teepee finally, exhaustion pulling her down into furs that smelled like smoke and safety. As she drifted towards sleep, she thought about Apiatan's sister, about all the women who'd been taken and broken and discarded, about all the people who'd looked away because it was easier than standing up, such a die. She thought about the knife in her hand that morning, the weight of it, the possibility it represented, and for the first time since Clayton Mercer had locked that bedroom door, Violet Warren felt something other than fear. She felt rage, clean and pure and burning like the fire outside. Rage at what had been done to her. Rage at a world that allowed it. Rage at every man who thought women were things to be owned and used and discarded when they broke. That rage was dangerous. Apiatan had said she needed to be dangerous. Maybe she was finally learning how. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming rain and distant smoke. The horses stirred restlessly in their line. A coyote called from somewhere in the darkness, its cry lonely and wild and free. Tomorrow, the training would continue. Tomorrow she would be faster, stronger, more dangerous. Tomorrow she would be one day closer to the woman she needed to become. But tonight she slept and dreamed of fire. The 3rd day of training started before sunrise. Violet's body screamed in protest when Apiatan shook her awake, every muscle she owned announcing its existence through pain. She'd fallen asleep, still dressed in the deerskin clothing, too exhausted to even remove her boots. "Up," Apiatan said, his voice cutting through the fog of sleep. "Pain is just your body learning. It will pass." Violet groaned, but forced herself to sit up. Through the teepee's opening, she could see the sky was still more black than blue, stars fading, but the sun not yet visible. "What time is it?" "Time to stop being weak," Apiatan replied, which wasn't really an answer. He tossed something at her, a thick piece of leather wrapped around a wooden handle. "Today, you learn to hit something that hits back." She stumbled outside to find the camp already stirring. The fire had been built up, casting dancing shadows across the faces of early risers. The young warrior who'd spit at Clayton Mercer's name, the one Apiatan called Nashoba, stood near the practice area. He looked annoyed to be awake, his arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight with barely concealed hostility. "Nashoba will be your opponent today," Apiatan explained as they walked toward the flat training ground. "He does not like you. He does not trust you. This is good. Your enemies will not like or trust you either. That's supposed to make me feel better?" Violet asked, eyeing Nashoba's muscled frame with growing anxiety. "It is supposed to make you ready," Apiatan corrected. He gestured to the leather-wrapped club in her hand. "This is for practice. It will hurt when it connects, but it will not break bones. Probably." "Probably." Violet's voice rose. "You want to learn or you want to stay safe? You cannot have both." Apiatan positioned her across from Nashoba, who cracked his knuckles with deliberate menace. "He will try to hurt you. Not kill, but hurt. You will try to hurt him back. First one to yield loses." Before Violet could protest or ask questions or do anything except panic, Nashoba moved. He was fast, faster than she expected, the practice club whistling through the air toward her ribs. She dodged on pure instinct, stumbled, barely kept her feet. "Do not just avoid," Apiatan called from the sideline. "Attack," easy for him to say. Nashoba pressed forward, his strikes coming in combinations now, high then low, forcing Violet to backpedal. She tried to swing her own club, but her movements were clumsy, telegraphed. Nashoba batted her weapon aside contemptuously and landed a solid hit to her shoulder. Pain exploded bright and sharp. Violet gasped, nearly dropped her club. Nashoba said something in Comanche that sounded like an insult based on his tone. Rage flared hot in Violet's chest, burning through the pain. She swung wild, putting all her frustration and fear and anger behind it. The club connected with Nashoba's forearm with a satisfying thwack. His eyes widened in surprise. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been given permission to stop holding back. What followed was brutal. Nashoba didn't seriously injure her, but he didn't coddle her either. Every time she dropped her guard, he struck. Every time she got sloppy, he punished it. Violet's world narrowed to blocking, dodging, occasionally landing a hit that did nothing except make Nashoba hit back harder. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool morning air. "Use your size," Apiatan instructed. "You are smaller, faster. He is strong but slow. Make him chase you," Violet tried. She circled, keeping distance, darting in for quick strikes before retreating. It worked slightly better. Nashoba's breathing got heavier as he had to work to close the distance. She managed to land a hit to his ribs that made him grunt. Small victory, but it counted. Then her foot caught on a rock. She went down hard, the club flying from her hand. Nashoba loomed over her, his practice weapon raised for a finishing blow. Violet's hand scrabbled in the dirt, found a handful of sand and small stones. Without thinking, acting on pure survival instinct, she threw it directly into Nashoba's face. He reeled back, cursing in Comanche, pouring at his eyes. Violet scrambled to her feet, grabbed her fallen club and swung hard at his knee. The hit connected solidly. Nashoba dropped to one knee with a roar of pain and outrage. "Enough!" Apiatan called, stepping between them. He looked at Violet with something that might have been approval. "Dirty fighting." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Violet started. "No apology," Apiatan cut her off. "In real fight, there is no dirty or clean. There is only alive or dead. You chose alive. Good. He turned to Nashoba, who was still blinking tears from his sand-filled eyes, and said something in Comanche that made the younger warrior laugh, despite his obvious pain. Nashoba stood slowly, testing his knee, then looked at Violet with new respect. He said something, his tone less hostile. Ipiatan translated, "He says you fight like a cornered wolf." This is a compliment. Violet managed a weak smile, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "Tell him I'm sorry about the sand," Apiatan translated. Nashoba's response made Apiatan chuckle, a rare sound. He says next time he will throw sand first. The morning training continued, but it was different now. Nashoba still didn't hold back, but there was less cruelty in it. He was teaching rather than punishing. When Violet made a good move, he nodded acknowledgement. When she made a mistake, he showed her the correct form. By the time the sun was fully up, they were both exhausted, bruised, but something like understanding had formed between them. The older woman, whose name Violet had learned was Ayana, brought them both food and water. She fussed over Violet's bruises, clicking her tongue disapprovingly at Apiatan and Nashoba, though her eyes held amusement. She pressed a poultice to Violet's shoulder when Nashoba's first strike had landed, the herbs inside cool and soothing against the inflamed skin. "She says men are idiots who think bruises teach better than patience," Apiatan translated with a straight face. She is probably right. That afternoon, while Violet rested and tried to convince her body it wasn't dying, a commotion arose near the camp's edge. Riders were approaching, but these weren't enemies. They were Comanche, 3 of them, from another band based on the different patterns in their clothing. They spoke urgently with Apiatan, their voices carrying worry. Violet watched from the shade of her teepee, unable to understand the words, but reading the body language clearly enough. Bad news. When the riders left, heading back the way they'd come, Apiatan's face was stone. He gathered the camp's warriors, speaking in low, urgent tones. Decisions were being made. Nashoba broke away from the group and came to Violet's teepee. His English was rougher than Apiatan's, but understandable. "Mercer's men in Cedar Springs. They have found Apache tracker. He will lead them here." Violet's stomach dropped. "When?" "Tomorrow. Maybe day after." Nashoba's jaw clenched. "Apache tracker is called Red Hand. He is very good. He will find this camp. Then I need to leave," Violet said, starting to stand despite her protesting muscles. "Right now." "Lead them away from here." "No!" Nashoba's hand on her shoulder pushed her back down, not roughly but firmly. "Apiatan has made decision. You stay. We prepare." "People could die because of me," Violet protested, her voice cracking. "People die anyway," Nashoba said with brutal honesty. "Maybe because of you. Maybe because Mercer wants to prove he can push Comanche around. Does not matter why. Matters only that we choose to fight." He paused, seeming to search for words. "You are not special. You are not first runaway we protect. You will not be last. This is just another fight in a long war." The words should have stung, but somehow they were comforting. She wasn't a burden uniquely hers. She was just another battle in a war that had been raging long before she was born and would continue long after. That evening, the camp's energy shifted from daily routine to preparation for conflict. Weapons were sharpened with deliberate care. Arrows were fletched and sorted by quality. The best horses were separated from the herd, fed extra grain, checked for soundness. Children were instructed in what to do if fighting started, where to run, how to hide. The women prepared medical supplies, tearing cloth into bandages, mixing poultices from herbs, their faces grim but determined. Violet found herself helping Ayana, grateful for something useful to do. The older woman showed her which plants to grind, how to mix them with fat to make healing salves. They worked in companionable silence, their hands moving in rhythm. At one point, Ayana placed her palm against Violet's cheek, said something soft in Comanche, her eyes full of maternal warmth. "She says you have good heart," Apiatan translated from nearby where he was checking arrows. "Scared heart, but good. Fear is not weakness if you act anyway." Violet's eyes burned with unexpected tears. "I'm terrified." I don't want anyone hurt because of me. Apiatan set down his arrows and came to crouch in front of her. Listen carefully. Mercer's men are not coming because of you. They are coming because Mercer is the kind of man who thinks he owns everything, including people. If not you, it would be something else. Land dispute, stolen horses, anything. Men like him always find reasons to bring violence. His scarred hand gripped her shoulder. You did not create this fight. You only gave it a face. That doesn't make me feel better, Violet whispered. Good. Feeling better is not the goal. Surviving is the goal. He stood, returned to his arrows. Tomorrow you train more. Day after maybe we fight. You will be ready or you will not. Either way, you will face it. That night Violet couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in her teepee listening to the camp sounds. Low conversations. A baby crying briefly, then quieting. Horses moving restlessly. Somewhere someone was singing. A Comanche song with a melody that sounded ancient and sad and defiant all at once. She thought about Clayton Mercer, probably sleeping soundly in his big house with its expensive furniture and blood-stained floorboards. Did he think about her at all? Did he feel any guilt for what he'd done? Or was she just an inconvenience, a piece of property that had malfunctioned and needed to be retrieved and corrected? She thought about her father, who'd sold her to pay his debts. Was he worried? Did he wonder if she was alive or dead? Or was he just relieved the debt was settled, one less mouth to feed, one less problem to solve? She thought about all the women who'd been in her position throughout history. Bought and sold, used and discarded, too afraid or too broken to run. The ones who'd survived by becoming small and quiet and obedient. The ones who'd survived by dying inside and letting their bodies go through the motions. The ones who hadn't survived at all. And she thought about Apiatan's sister walking into that river with stones in her pockets, 12 years old, and already knowing that death was preferable to what had been done to her. How many others had made that same choice? How many more would? The rage came back then, hot and clean. Not the helpless fury of a victim, but something sharper, more focused. The anger of someone who'd been pushed past breaking and found something harder than bone on the other side. She got up, ignoring her body's complaints, and went outside. The camp was quiet now, most everyone asleep. Only the watch was awake, a young warrior whose name she didn't know, standing at the camp's edge with a rifle. He nodded to her but didn't speak. The fire was down to coals, pulsing red and orange in the darkness. Violet sat beside it, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. Above, the stars were impossibly bright, the Milky Way a river of light cutting across the black. She'd never really looked at stars before. In town there were too many lamps. At her father's farm, she'd been too busy or too tired. At Mercer's house, she'd been too afraid to even look out windows. But here, now, she looked up and felt small in a way that was somehow freeing rather than frightening. The universe was vast, and she was tiny, and none of her problems mattered to those distant suns. But somehow that made her problems feel more manageable. The universe didn't care if she was ruined or pure, or property or free. The universe just was, indifferent and eternal, cannot sleep. Apiatan's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. Too much thinking, Violet admitted. He sat down beside her, his movements fluid despite his size. For a while they both just stared at the coals, the silence comfortable. Then Apiatan spoke. What do you think about? Everything, nothing. How we're all so small and temporary. Violet pulled the blanket tighter. How none of this matters in the big scheme of things. Then why fight? Apiatan asked, but his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Because it matters to me. To us, to the people in this camp. Violet looked at him. Because if we don't fight for the small temporary things, then what's the point of being alive at all? Apiatan nodded slowly. You are starting to understand. Understand what? Why we have not given up. Why we keep fighting even when we know we will probably lose. Why we protect people who are not even our blood. He gestured around at the sleeping camp. This is all temporary. In 100 years, none of us will be remembered. Our names will be forgotten. Our struggles will be footnotes, if that. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. But right now, in this moment, we are alive. We can choose to be brave or cowardly, kind or cruel, strong or weak. Those choices matter, even if no one remembers them. Violet felt something shift in her chest, some locked door opening. Is that why you saved me? Because in that moment you could choose to be kind. I told you before, not kindness, strategy. But there was something in his voice that suggested otherwise. Liar, Violet said softly. Apiatan's mouth twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. Perhaps. Sometimes strategy and kindness look the same. Does not mean they are. They sat in silence again, watching the coals fade. Eventually Apiatan stood. You should sleep. Tomorrow will be hard. Day after harder. Wait, Violet said. If we survive this, if Mercer's men don't take me, what happens then? I can't stay here forever. Why not? Apiatan asked. Because I'm not Comanche. I don't belong here. Belonging is not about blood. It is about choice. Apiatan looked down at her, his face serious in the faint starlight. You have chosen to stand with us. We have chosen to stand with you. That is belonging. It's not that simple, Violet protested. It is exactly that simple. People make it complicated because complicated gives them excuses to exclude others. He started to walk away, then paused. You belong anywhere you are willing to fight for. Remember that. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Violet alone with the dying fire and thoughts that felt less chaotic than before. She did eventually sleep, curled up near the coals, the blanket wrapped tight around her. Her dreams were fractured, violent, full of running and fighting and blood. But somewhere in those dreams, she was also flying, soaring above the plains, with wind in her hair and nothing to hold her down. When she woke at dawn, Apiatan was already there with her practice club. Up, he said. Today you learn to fight with tired body. Your enemies will not wait for you to be rested. Violet groaned but stood. Her muscles had stiffened overnight. Everything hurt worse than yesterday. But she took the club, faced Nashoba, who looked equally tired, and prepared for another day of controlled violence. Because choice was the only power she had. And she chose to be ready. They came at midday when the sun was highest and shadows were shortest. 6 riders emerging from the heat shimmer like demons, materializing from hell itself. Violet saw them first, from where she stood at the camp's edge, her hand instinctively moving to the knife Apiatan had given her that morning. A real knife this time, not a practice weapon. The blade sharp enough to split hair. Apiatan, she called, her voice steadier than she felt. They're here. The camp transformed in seconds. Children disappeared into teepees with their mothers. Warriors took positions behind natural cover, rocks and trees, and the gentle rise of land that gave advantage to defenders. Apiatan stood in the center of the camp, Nashoba to his right, an older warrior named Takoda to his left. 3 men facing 6, but their stance radiated such confident menace that the numbers felt less uneven. Violet started to move toward the teepees with the other women, but Apiatan's voice stopped her. No, you stand with us. I can't fight 6 men, Violet protested. You will not have to fight 6. You will fight 1, maybe 2. We will handle the rest. His eyes never left the approaching riders. They came for you. You do not hide from them. You show them what you have become. Violet's legs felt like water, but she moved to stand beside Nashoba. He handed her something without looking, his attention on the riders. It was a short spear, the kind used for close combat, the wooden shaft smooth from use. You know how to use this? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. You've never taught me spear fighting, Violet said. Pointy end goes in the enemy, Nashoba replied. That is all you need to know. The riders stopped 30 yards out, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid immediate violence. Clayton Mercer wasn't among them. Of course not. Men like him never did their own dirty work. But the man in front was clearly the leader. Tall, weathered face, eyes like chips of flint. He wore a marshal's badge that caught the sunlight. Legal authority backing illegal intentions. I'm Marshal Pike, the man called out. I'm here for Violet Warren. She's wanted for theft of property, namely one wedding dress and personal items belonging to Clayton Mercer. You hand her over. Nobody needs to get hurt." Apiatan said nothing. His silence was more intimidating than any words could have been. Pike's jaw tightened. "I got papers, legal documents. That woman is Mercer's wife, married proper and legal. Texas law says she belongs with her husband." "Texas law," Apiatan finally spoke. His English, slow and deliberate, has no power here. "This is not Texas. This is Comanche land." "The hell it is," Pike snapped. "This is United States territory, and you're squatting on it. Now you can hand over the woman peaceful, or we can take her by force. Your choice." One of the other riders, younger and stupider looking, added, "And we'll burn this camp to the ground while we're at it. Teach you savages about respecting white women." Violet felt Nashoba tense beside her, his grip tightening on his rifle. Apiatan's hand moved in a subtle gesture that meant hold. "Not yet. That woman," Apiatan said, each word careful and weighted, "came here broken, bleeding, bruised. She ran from a man who treats his wife worse than his horses. You want to return her to that?" "What a man does with his wife ain't your concern," Pike said. "Law's the law." "Then your law is broken," Apiatan replied. "Here is new law. She stays. You leave. Everyone lives." "Good trade." Pike's hand moved toward his pistol. The 5 men behind him followed suit, a coordinated movement that spoke of practice. "Last chance, Chief. Hand her over or we start shooting." "I'm not going back." Violet's voice rang out before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. Her hands shook, but she kept talking. "I'd rather die right here than spend another night in that house." Pike's expression didn't change. "That can be arranged." Everything happened at once. Pike drew his pistol, the movement fast but not fast enough. Abiatan's knife left his hand like a striking snake, the blade embedding itself in Pike's shoulder. The marshal screamed, his shot going wild. The other 5 riders drew weapons, horses dancing nervously beneath them. Nashoba's rifle barked, the sound impossibly loud. One rider dropped, blood blooming across his chest. Return fire cracked through the air. Violet threw herself flat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Bullets kicked up dirt around her, one passing so close she felt its heat. Takoda moved with frightening speed for a man his age, closing the distance to the nearest rider before the man could properly aim. He pulled the rider from his horse, his knife flashing in the sunlight. The rider's scream cut off abruptly, wetly. 2 riders wheeled their horses, clearly reconsidering their life choices. But the young, stupid one, the one who'd threatened to burn the camp, he charged forward with a rifle aimed at Apiatan. Violet saw it happening as if time had slowed. Saw the rider's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Apiatan turning but not fast enough, saw the angle that would put a bullet through the warrior's chest. She moved without thinking. The spear Nashoba had given her was in her hands, and then it wasn't, flying through the air with all the strength her battered arms could muster. Her form was terrible, her aim was luck more than skill, but the spear caught the rider in his side, punching through leather and flesh. His shot went high, his horse reared, and he toppled backward out of the saddle. The remaining 3 riders broke. They spurred their horses hard, abandoning Pike, who was still on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, abandoning their dead, thinking only of escape. Nashoba fired again, more warning than serious attempt to hit. The riders disappeared over the ridge, dust marking their retreat. Silence crashed down like a wave. Violet's ears rang from the gunfire. Her hands shook so badly she could barely stand. She'd just killed a man, or badly wounded him at least. The rider she'd hit with the spear was moving, groaning, blood soaking through his shirt. The reality of what she'd done hit her like a fist. First kill. Apiatan was beside her suddenly, his hand steady on her shoulder. I don't know, maybe he's still moving. Violet couldn't take her eyes off the wounded rider. "He will not move much longer," Apiatan said matter-of-factly. "You saved my life." "Thank you." "I killed someone," Violet whispered. "Yes, you chose my life over his. This is what survival looks like. It is not clean. It is not fair. But it is necessary." Apiatan's grip tightened slightly. "The sickness you feel, the horror, keep it. The day killing becomes easy is the day you lose your humanity." But do not let it paralyze you. Neshoba was moving among the bodies, checking for life, collecting weapons. He said something in Comanche, gesturing to Pike, who was trying to crawl away, despite his wounded shoulder. Apiaton responded, then turned to Violet. The Marshal is problem. We let him go, he brings army. We kill him. We make ourselves murderers in eyes of law. Apiaton's expression was thoughtful. What do you think we should do? Violet stared at him. You're asking me? He came for you. Your decision affects everyone here. So yes, I ask you. Violet walked over to where Pike had collapsed, his face pale from blood loss and pain. He looked up at her with hatred burning in his eyes. You're dead, girl. You and every savage here. Mercer will make sure of it. Mercer beat me on my wedding night, Violet said, her voice cold. He raped me in a bedroom where I couldn't escape. He treated me like property he had a right to damage. And you came here to take me back to that. She crouched down to his level. You're not a lawman. You're just another man who thinks badges excuse cruelty. I'm doing my job, Pike spat. Your job is wrong, Violet said simply. She stood, looked at Apiaton. Let him go. Let him take his dead back to Mercer. Let him tell everyone what happened here. He will bring more men, Neshoba protested. Let him, Violet said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Let Mercer know that I'm not alone. That there are people willing to fight for me. That taking me back will cost blood and lives, and maybe more than he's willing to pay. She looked back down at Pike. And let him know that if he sends men again, we'll be ready. Apiaton studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Take him. Take your dead. Tell Mercer what you saw here. Tell him the next men he sends, we keep. Pike struggled to his feet, clutching his shoulder. 2 of his men were dead. 1 was dying from Violet's spear. 3 had run. His authority had been shattered, his confidence broken. He stumbled toward his horse, managed to pull himself into the saddle with his good arm. He looked at Violet one more time, and this time there was something besides hatred. Fear, maybe. Respect, possibly. This ain't over, he said. Yes, it is, Violet replied. You just don't know it yet. Pike rode off, leaving his dead behind. The Comanche would give them proper burial, better than they deserved, but in keeping with honor. The rider Violet had speared died while they watched, his breathing stopping with a rattle that would haunt her dreams. She'd killed him, ended a life. The weight of it settled onto her shoulders like physical mass. The camp slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal after violence. The women emerged from teepees, checking everyone for injuries. Ayana fussed over a graze on Neshoba's arm, scolding him in Comanche while she bandaged it. Children peeked out, wide-eyed, processing what they'd witnessed. This was their education in survival, harsh and unforgiving. Violet found herself sitting by the fire, staring at her hands. These hands that had held a spear, that had thrown it hard enough to pierce flesh and bone, that had killed. They looked the same as always, but they felt different, heavier, stained with something invisible but permanent. Apiaton sat beside her. Didn't speak at first, just shared the silence. Finally, you are thinking about the man you killed. How do you stop seeing it? Violet asked quietly. You do not. You carry it. Every life taken stays with you. Apiaton's voice was distant, remembering. I have killed 23 men. I know each face, each name if they spoke it. I carry them all. Doesn't it drive you mad? Sometimes. But madness is luxury. Survival requires focus. He looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much. You think you are ruined now, impure, stained by what you have done. Violet nodded, unable to speak. You are wrong. You are not ruined. You are forged. Like metal in fire, you have been heated and hammered and shaped into something stronger. Apiaton's hand covered hers briefly. The woman who arrived here 5 days ago could not have done what you did today. She would have hidden, frozen, died, but you stood. You fought. You chose life over fear. I don't feel strong, Violet whispered. I feel sick. Good. That is how you know you are still human. Apiaton stood. Rest now. Tomorrow we prepare for what comes next. That night Violet lay in her teepee, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rider falling, saw the spear in his side, saw the life leaving his body. She'd taken that life, ended someone's son, brother, maybe father. The man had been trying to kill Apiatan, true, but he was still human, still deserved to live, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe men, who came to drag traumatized women back to their abusers, deserved exactly what they got. Maybe the world was better with one less man willing to enforce cruelty for money. Maybe her guilt was misplaced, programmed into her by a society that wanted women docile and apologetic, even when defending themselves. She didn't know, didn't have answers, just questions that spiraled in her head like vultures. Somewhere near dawn, she finally slept. Dreamed of blood and fire and a river that ran red. Dreamed of Clayton Mercer's face when he heard what happened, the rage that would be there, the wounded pride. Dreamed of more men coming, an army maybe, overwhelming the small camp through sheer numbers. But she also dreamed of standing her ground, of fighting, of refusing to go quietly back into the cage that society had built for women like her. And in those dreams she won. Not through superior strength or numbers, but through sheer refusal to break. When she woke, the camp was already preparing. Not for another attack, not yet, but for the possibility of one. Weapons were redistributed, guards were doubled, scouts were sent out to watch the approaches. Everyone moved with purpose, the easy rhythm of people who'd lived with danger their entire lives. Violet emerged from her teepee to find Neshoba waiting. He handed her a bow, simple but well made. You learn this today. Spear is good for close. Bow is better for far. I've never shot a bow, Violet protested. Then today you learn, Neshoba said, echoing Apiatan's philosophy. Come. They walked to a different part of the camp where targets had been set up, bundles of grass shaped roughly like human torsos. Neshoba demonstrated the stance, the draw, the release. Made it look effortless. Then handed the bow to Violet. Her first arrow went wide, missing the target by 10 feet. The second hit the ground halfway there. The third actually hit the target barely, catching the very edge. Neshoba nodded approval at that small success. Again, he said. They practiced for hours. Violet's fingers blistered, her shoulders screamed, her back ached from maintaining the proper stance. But slowly, incrementally, she improved. More arrows hit than missed. Some even clustered near the center. It wasn't mastery, not even close, but it was progress. Between rounds, while her arms rested, Neshoba spoke. His English was improving with practice. You are brave. Stupid but brave, thanks. Violet wasn't sure if that was a compliment. Most white women we find, they cry. They wait for white men to save them. They do not throw spears. Neshoba's expression was thoughtful. You are different. Maybe because you have nowhere else to go. Maybe because you are done being weak. Does not matter why. Matters that you fight. I'm still scared, Violet admitted. Good. Fear keeps you careful. Makes you think before acting. Neshoba handed her another arrow. Bravery is not absence of fear. Is acting despite fear. You have this. Maybe you always did, just never needed it before. Violet knocked the arrow, drew, released. This one hit dead center. Neshoba grunted approval. That evening, as the sun set in colors that turned the sky into bleeding canvas, Apiatan called a council. All the warriors gathered, plus the women who'd earned voice through age or deed. Violet was included, her presence no longer questioned. They sat in a circle, the fire crackling between them, and discussed the future. The Apache tracker Red Hand would still come. The 3 riders who'd escaped would report back to Mercer. More men would follow, better prepared, more numerous. The camp would need to move or stand, and neither option was good. Moving meant abandoning territory, showing weakness. Standing meant potential massacre if overwhelming force arrived. Arguments flew in Comanche, voices raised, but not angry, just passionate. Violet couldn't understand the words, but read the emotions clearly. Fear, determination, frustration, defiance. These people had been fighting this fight for generations. They were tired, but not broken. Finally, Apiatan raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. The discussion ended. Decision made. He turned to Violet, switched to English so she'd understand. We do not run. We prepare. If Mercer wants war, we give him war. His eyes glinted in the firelight. But we choose the ground. We choose the time. We turn his strength into weakness. How? Violet asked. Apiatan smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey. You are bait. But this time bait with teeth. Violet felt ice run down her spine, but also something else. Something hot and fierce. Tell me what you need me to do. Tomorrow, Apiatan said. Tomorrow we plan. Tonight we rest. Celebrate survival. Honor the dead. Prepare for what comes. The council dissolved. People dispersed to their tasks or their rest. Violet remained by the fire, watching the flames consume wood and turn it to ash. Transformation through destruction. Maybe that's what was happening to her. The woman she'd been was burning away, leaving something harder and sharper behind. Ayana appeared beside her, pressed a cup of something warm into her hands. Tea bitter but soothing. The old woman sat, didn't speak, just shared space and silence. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes presence mattered more than words. Violet sipped the tea, felt its warmth spread through her chest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More violence, probably. Maybe death. But tonight she was alive. Tonight she was free. Tonight she was surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her, even when it cost them. And that, she thought, was worth fighting for. The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Violet would ride into Cedar Springs alone, make herself visible. Let word reach Mercer that his runaway wife was within grasp. When his men came for her, and they would come, she'd lead them into the canyon, 3 miles north of the Comanche camp. A place called Devil's Throat by the locals, a narrow passage with high walls and only 2 ways out. Perfect for an ambush. You will be alone for maybe 2 hours, Apiatan explained, tracing lines in the dirt to show the route. Long enough for them to think you are unprotected. Long enough for greed to overcome caution. And if they just shoot me on sight? Violet asked, the question practical rather than fearful. They will not. Mercer wants you alive, wants to punish you himself, make example of you. Dead wife is failure. Captured wife is lesson to other women who think of running. Apiatan's jaw tightened. His pride will keep you breathing. Use that, Neshoba added. You will have rifle. If things go wrong before canyon, you shoot your way out. We will hear gunfire, we'll come fast, and if I can't shoot my way out? Violet pressed. Then you die brave instead of die scared, Neshoba said with characteristic bluntness. But you will not die. You're too mean now. Despite everything, Violet smiled. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a terrified girl in a torn wedding dress. Now she was planning to bait a trap that could get everyone killed, and somehow that felt like progress. They spent the next day preparing. Violet practiced riding at speed, learning to shoot from horseback, which was infinitely harder than shooting while standing still. The horse moved, the target moved, everything moved, and hitting anything smaller than a barn required luck as much as skill. But she got better, or at least less terrible. Ayana insisted on making her a proper outfit for the mission. Not traditional Comanche dress, but something in between. Pants like a man for riding, but a shirt decorated with small beadwork that marked her as under Comanche protection. Anyone who knew the symbols would understand she wasn't alone, wasn't undefended. Let them chew on that uncertainty. That evening, Violet sat with Apiatan away from camp, watching the sun set over the plains. The sky was doing that thing, where it looked like the world was ending in the best possible way. All oranges and purples and colors that didn't have names. You do not have to do this, Apiatan said quietly. We can find another way. No, we can't, Violet replied. This is the best chance. The only chance, really. If we wait, Mercer brings an army. This way we control the numbers. You have changed much in short time, Apiatan observed. I had good teachers, Violet said. Then after a pause, can I ask you something? Always, your sister. The one who walked into the river. What was her name? Apiatan was silent so long, Violet thought maybe she'd overstepped. Then Kimimela. It means butterfly. She loved butterflies, would chase them through the grass for hours. So small, so fragile, but so determined. His voice carried old grief, the kind that never fully healed. After she died, I did not see Butterfly for 3 years. Then one day, Yellow One landed on my hand while I was sharpening knife. Sat there for a long time, just resting. I knew it was her, telling me she was free now, that the river had given her wings. Violet's throat tightened. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry the world is a place where such losses happen, Apiatan corrected. But I carry her with me. Every fight, every stand, every time I choose not to look away, she is there. Giving me wings, too, in different way. They sat in silence as darkness fell and stars emerged like holes, poked in black fabric. Somewhere out there, Clayton Mercer was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, men were being hired and armed and pointed toward this camp like weapons. Somewhere out there, violence was gathering like storm clouds, but here now there was peace. Temporary and fragile, but real. Tomorrow I might die, Violet said, not dramatically, just stating fact. Yes, you might. We all might. Apiatan's response was equally matter-of-fact. But you also might live, might win, might become the story other women tell when they need courage to run. That's a lot of pressure, Violet said with a weak laugh. Then do not think about other women. Think only about yourself, about the girl who was given to a monster and decided monsters could bleed. Apiatan stood, offered his hand to help her up. That girl is already a story. Tomorrow, you just add another chapter. They walked back to camp together. The fire was burning high. People gathered around it, voices rising in song. A Comanche song Violet didn't know, but the melody was both mournful and defiant. A song about loss and survival, about standing when falling would be easier. She didn't understand the words, but she felt them in her bones. Nashoba appeared beside her, thrust a cup into her hand, some kind of fermented drink, bitter and strong. Tonight we drink. Tomorrow we fight. This is the way. Violet drank. It burned going down, settled warm in her stomach. Around the fire, people were smiling despite tomorrow's uncertainty. Children were laughing. Couples held hands. Life persisting in the face of death's certainty. She found herself pulled into a dance, women on one side, men on the other. The two lines moving in complex patterns Violet didn't understand, but tried to follow anyway. She stumbled, laughed, tried again. Ayana was beside her, guiding her steps with gentle pressure. Her wrinkled face creased with joy. For just this moment, there was no war. No threat, no fear. Just people celebrating the simple fact of being alive. Later, much later, when the fire had burned low and people had drifted to their teepees, Violet found herself alone again. Not lonely, just solitary. She thought about writing a letter, something to be found if she didn't come back. But what would she say? And to whom? Her father had sold her. She had no siblings, no friends who'd stood by her. The people who mattered were all here in this camp, and they didn't need letters to know what she felt. She did take out the knife Apiatan had given her, held it in the firelight, watched the blade gleam. This knife had killed, would kill again if tomorrow went according to plan. It was a tool of survival, neither good nor evil, just necessary. She traced her finger along the flat of the blade, careful not to touch the edge. Talking to your knife? Nashoba's voice came from the darkness. That is either very wise or very crazy. Can't it be both? Violet replied. Nashoba sat down, his movement slightly unsteady from drink. I want to say something. My English is not good for this, but I try. He paused, gathering words. When you first came, I wanted Apiatan to send you away. You were white. You were trouble. You would bring soldiers and death to my people. He looked at her directly. I was right. You did bring trouble, but you also brought something else. What? Violet asked quietly. Reminder that we fight for something real, not just land or pride or revenge. We fight for people who need protection, for those who cannot fight for themselves. You reminded us why we do not just surrender and accept reservation life. Nashoba's expression was serious. So I am sorry I wanted you gone, and I am glad you stayed, even if tomorrow kills us all. That's very cheerful, Violet said, but her voice was warm. I am drunk and honest. Tomorrow I will be sober and tactical. Enjoy this moment. Neshoba stood, swayed slightly, steadied himself. Do not die tomorrow. Would be waste of good training. He wandered off toward his teepee, leaving Violet alone with her thoughts and the dying fire. She should sleep. Tomorrow required all her strength, all her focus, all her newly learned courage. But sleep felt like surrender somehow, like admitting that time was moving forward whether she was ready or not. Eventually exhaustion claimed her. She stumbled to her teepee, collapsed onto the furs without undressing, and fell into dreams that were strange and vivid. She dreamed of butterflies, yellow ones, thousands of them, filling the sky like living sunlight. She dreamed of rivers that ran clear instead of red. She dreamed of a house with no locked doors, windows open to air that smelled like sage and freedom. And she dreamed of Clayton Mercer's face when he realized his property had teeth. Dawn came too fast. Violet woke to Ayana gently shaking her shoulder, the older woman's face solemn. Today was the day. No more preparation, no more practice, just action and consequence. She dressed carefully in the outfit Ayana had made. Checked her weapons 3 times. Rifle, knife, small pistol tucked in her boot. Enough ammunition to start a war or end one. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. The fear was there, but it was background noise now, easily ignored. The horse they'd chosen for her was a mare, quick and smart, with kind eyes and steady temperament. Violet ran her hand along the mare's neck, feeling the warmth and strength beneath the hide. "You and me today," she whispered. "Let's not die." The mare woofed softly as if agreeing. Apiatan performed a blessing, touching her forehead and speaking in Comanche. Violet didn't understand the words, but the intent was clear: protection, strength, victory, or at least death with honor. She bowed her head, accepted the blessing, felt its weight settle onto her shoulders like invisible armor. "Remember the plan," Apiatan said, switching to English. "Make them see you. Make them chase. Lead them to Devil's Throat. We will be waiting, and if they don't chase," Violet asked, "they will chase. Men like them always chase what runs. It is their nature." Apiatan gripped her shoulder. "You are not the frightened girl anymore. You are the wolf who learned to hunt. Remember that," Violet nodded. Mounted the mare with movements that had become second nature over the past weeks. Settled into the saddle, checked her rifle one more time. Around her, the camp was watching. Women, children, warriors. All of them betting their lives on this plan. All of them trusting her to play her part. She met Neshoba's eyes. He nodded once, respect clear in his expression. Met Ayana's eyes. The old woman smiled, sad but proud. Met Apiatan's eyes. He said nothing, but his look carried everything that needed saying. Then Violet turned the mare toward Cedar Springs and rode. The journey took 2 hours. The mare eating up ground with an easy lope that covered distance without exhausting her. Violet used the time to center herself, to push fear into a small box in the back of her mind where it couldn't interfere with what needed doing. She was bait. She was trap. She was the story other women would tell. Cedar Springs appeared on the horizon, a collection of maybe 20 buildings clustered around a spring that gave the town its name. Violet could see people moving in the streets, horses tied to rails, normal life happening in ignorance of what was coming. She rode straight down the main street, making no attempt to hide or hurry. She wanted to be seen, needed to be seen. Conversation stopped as she passed. Heads turned. A woman in Comanche-decorated clothing riding alone was unusual enough to draw attention. That the woman matched the description of Clayton Mercer's runaway wife made her downright sensational. Violet felt their stares like physical weight, but she kept her back straight, her expression calm. She stopped in front of the general store, dismounted, tied her mare to the rail like she had every right to be there. Walked inside with confidence she'd learned from Apiatan, the kind that made people hesitate before challenging you. The storekeeper's eyes went wide. "You're her. You're that Mercer woman." "I'm Violet Warren," she corrected, her voice steady. "And I need supplies. Lady, you got some nerve walking in here bold as brass. Mercer's got half the county looking for you." The storekeeper was middle-aged, nervous, already calculating whether helping her would cause more trouble than refusing. "Then I suggest you sell me what I need quickly," Violet said. She placed coins on the counter, overpaying deliberately. "Unless you want to explain to him why you delayed me." The storekeeper grabbed the coins, started pulling items from shelves. Dried meat, hardtack, ammunition. His hand shook slightly, wanting this dangerous woman out of his store as fast as possible. While he worked, Violet heard running footsteps outside. Voices raised. Someone had gone to fetch Mercer's men. "Where are you even going?" The storekeeper asked, shoving her purchases into a canvas bag. "Does it matter?" Violet replied. She took the bag, headed for the door. Paused with her hand on the frame. "Tell Mercer I said hello. Tell him I'm not scared anymore. Tell him I'll be waiting." She walked out into sunlight that seemed too bright, too normal for what was about to happen. 4 men were standing near her horse, hands on weapons, trying to look threatening. She recognized one of them from the group that had fled the Comanche camp. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Well," Violet said casually, "this is convenient. Saves me from having to look for you." "You're coming with us," the man said, but his voice lacked conviction. He remembered what happened last time. "No," Violet said simply. She mounted her horse in one smooth motion, the mare sensing tension and dancing slightly. "But you're welcome to follow me, if you're brave enough." She spurred the mare into a gallop, heading north toward Devil's Throat. Behind her she heard shouting, horses being hastily mounted, the thunder of pursuit beginning. The trap was set. Now she just had to stay alive long enough to spring it. The mare ran like she was racing the wind itself, hooves pounding earth in a rhythm that matched Violet's heartbeat. She glanced back. 5 riders chasing, maybe 6. Good numbers. Not so many that they'd overwhelm the ambush, but enough to make Mercer regret sending them. The landscape flew past. Mesquite and cactus, rock formations that looked like sleeping giants, the endless sky overhead. Violet leaned low over the mare's neck, making herself a smaller target. A gunshot cracked behind her, the bullet going wide. They were shooting to slow her down, not kill. Mercer wanted her alive. Devil's Throat appeared ahead, the narrow canyon entrance like a wound in the earth. Violet aimed straight for it, the mare not hesitating even as the walls closed in on either side. Shadows fell across them, the temperature dropping as stone blocked the sun. Hoofbeats echoed strangely in the confined space. Behind her, the pursuers entered the canyon. She could hear them whooping, thinking they had her trapped. Stupid men, so certain of their superiority that they'd ridden straight into death without seeing it coming. Violet reached the halfway point, pulled hard on the reins. The mare skidded to a stop, turned. Violet raised her rifle, aimed at the lead rider, and fired. The shot went high, but it didn't need to hit. It was just a signal. From the canyon walls above, Apiatan and his warriors rose like spirits of vengeance. Arrows flew, bullets cracked, war cries split the air. The trapped men tried to turn, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The canyon walls were too steep to climb, the passage too narrow to maneuver. They'd ridden into a killing ground. It was over in less than a minute. 5 men down, 1 wounded and screaming. Violet sat her horse watching, feeling nothing. These men had come to drag her back to slavery, would have delivered her to Mercer without a second thought. Their deaths were just consequence of choosing wrong. Apiatan dropped from the wall with the grace of a hunting cat, walked among the bodies, checking for life. Found the wounded man, pulled him up by his shirt. Said something in a mix of Comanche and English, his voice carrying across the canyon. A message for any who might find these bodies. Then he looked at Violet. "You did well." "I led men to their deaths," Violet said, her voice flat. "You survived." "They chose to chase. They chose to ignore warning. They chose wrong." Apiatan released the wounded man, who collapsed whimpering. "Their choices, their consequences." Neshoba appeared beside her horse, grinning fiercely. "You see? I told you. Do mean to die." Despite everything, Violet laughed. It was slightly hysterical laughter, edged with shock and relief and leftover fear, but it was real. She'd done it. Played bait, sprung trap, survived. The plan had worked, but as they rode back toward camp, leaving the canyon and its dead behind, Violet knew this wasn't over. The wounded man would carry word back to Mercer. The bodies would be found. And Clayton Mercer, his pride wounded beyond bearing, would come himself next time. She was ready for him. 3 days passed in tense waiting. The camp didn't celebrate their victory at Devil's Throat because everyone knew it wasn't a victory, just a delay. The real fight was still coming. Scouts reported movement near Fort Griffin, riders gathering, supplies being loaded. An expedition was forming, and this time it wouldn't be 6 hired guns. This time it would be Clayton Mercer himself, backed by enough men to level the camp if they chose. Violet spent those 3 days in constant motion, training with Neshoba until her arms were numb, riding patrol with Dakota, learning to read the land for signs of approach, helping Ayana prepare medical supplies because wounded were inevitable. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into panic. On the 3rd night, Apiatan called her to his teepee. Inside, the space was simple but comfortable, furs arranged around a small fire pit, weapons hanging on the walls like deadly decoration. He gestured for her to sit, poured something from a clay vessel into 2 wooden cups. "Drink," he said. "It will steady your nerves." Violet drank. It was stronger than the fermented drink from the celebration, burned all the way down, but left warmth spreading through her chest. "You think he'll come tomorrow?" "I know he will come tomorrow. Scouts saw them making camp 8 miles east. They will move at dawn, be here by midday." Apiatan's face was calm, but his eyes held the weight of what was coming. 30 men, maybe more. Good horses, good weapons, and the arrogance of those who think law and numbers make them invincible. "Can we win against 30? Violet asked, though she already knew the answer. "No, not in straight fight. We are 12 warriors, some old, some young. We cannot match their numbers or their firepower." Apiatan took a long drink from his cup. "But we do not need to win. We only need to make winning cost more than Mercer is willing to pay. How?" Violet leaned forward, desperate for a plan that didn't end with everyone she cared about dead. "We do not fight here. Camp is too exposed, too easy to surround. We fight where land gives us advantage." Apiatan traced patterns in the dirt floor. "There is a place 2 hours north. Box Canyon with only 1 entrance. Spring inside for water, high walls for defense. We can hold there for days if we must. Make them pay for every foot of ground in blood." "A siege," Violet said, understanding dawning. "You want to draw them into a siege they can't win." "Exactly. They have numbers, but they do not have patience. Mercer is proud man, angry man. He will not wait weeks for us to starve. He will attack, we will bleed him, he will attack again. Each time he loses men he cannot replace. Each time his expedition grows weaker. Eventually, he will have to choose between continuing a fight that is costing too much or admitting defeat and going home. And if he chooses to keep fighting." Violet pressed. Apiatan's expression hardened. "Then we make sure he regrets that choice until his last breath." They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the violence that tomorrow would bring. Then Apiatan spoke again, his voice softer. "There is something else we must discuss. Something you will not like." Violet's stomach clenched. "What?" "If things go badly, if we cannot hold the canyon, if Mercer breaks through our defenses, you cannot be captured alive." Apiatan's eyes met hers, unflinching. "You understand what I am saying. You want me to kill myself rather than let him take me," Violet said, her voice hollow. "I want you to have choice. Mercer will not kill you quickly. He will make example of you, hurt you in ways that will make your wedding night seem merciful. He will break you slowly, publicly, so other women see what happens to those who run." Apiatan reached into his clothing, pulled out a small knife in a leather sheath. "This is for if capture is certain. Quick to the throat or heart. You will not suffer long." Violet took the knife with shaking hands. It was smaller than her fighting knife, designed for concealment and one specific purpose. The weight of it felt like holding her own death. "I don't know if I can. You will not know until the moment comes. But having the option is better than not having it." Apiatan's hand covered hers briefly. "I hope you never need to make that choice. But if you do, know that it is your choice, not his. Not anyone's but yours." Violet tucked the small knife into her boot, where it pressed against her ankle like a cold promise. If we survive this, if we somehow win, what happens then? Mercer won't be the last. There will always be men like him, always be laws that say women are property. Yes, Apiatan agreed. The world is broken in ways we cannot fix, but we can protect this small piece of it. We can say that here in this place, those laws do not reach. Here, people are free or they are dead, but they are never property. He smiled, rare and genuine. You asked before if you belong here. After tomorrow, if you live, no one will ever question it again. You will have earned your place in blood and fire. That's a terrible way to earn belonging, Violet said, but she was smiling too. All the best things are earned terribly, Apiatan replied. Now go, sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be long. Violet left his teepee, stepped out into night air that smelled like sage and coming rain. The camp was quiet. Everyone already asleep or pretending to be, storing up rest for the battle ahead. She walked to the edge of camp, where the land dropped away into darkness, stood looking at stars that seemed impossibly distant and indifferent. Cannot sleep either? Nashoba's voice came from nearby. He was sitting on a rock, sharpening his knife with slow, methodical strokes. Too much thinking, Violet admitted, sitting beside him. Thinking is dangerous before battle. Makes you hesitate, makes you doubt. Nashoba tested his blade's edge, nodded satisfaction. Better to empty your mind. Become like the knife, sharp, simple, purposeful. How do you do that? Violet asked. How do you just turn off the fear? I do not turn it off. I make it smaller. I think only about the next thing. Next breath, next step, next enemy. I do not think about dying or losing or what happens after. Just the next thing. Nashoba looked at her, his young face suddenly seeming much older. Tomorrow, when fighting starts, you do the same. Do not think about 30 men. Think about the one in front of you. Then the next one. Then the next. Until there are no more, or you are dead. Very inspirational, Violet said dryly. I am warrior, not poet, Nashoba replied, grinning. But I am alive, which is better than being inspiring and dead. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd started as strangers and somehow become friends through shared danger and survival. Eventually, Nashoba stood stretched. I'm going to sleep now. Tomorrow I kill many men, or I die trying. Either way, I want to be rested. He walked back toward the teepees, leaving Violet alone with the stars and her thoughts. She did eventually sleep, curled up near the dying fire, her hand resting on her knife. Dreamed of nothing, or nothing she remembered, which was a mercy. Dawn came gray and cold. The camp rose in silence, everyone moving with efficiency, born of necessity. The plan was simple: move to the box canyon, take defensive positions, make Mercer come to them. Women and children would go first with light guard. Warriors would follow after erasing signs of the camp's existence. Make Mercer work to find them, buy time, control the engagement. Violet helped pack supplies with the other women, her movements automatic, her mind focused on the next task and nothing beyond. Bedrolls, food, water, medical supplies, ammunition, everything needed to survive a siege, everything needed to fight and possibly die. Siana pressed something into Violet's hand, a small leather pouch on a cord. Inside, Violet could feel dried herbs, maybe a stone or bone. The old woman said something in Comanche, her eyes fierce and loving. Apiatan, passing by, translated, "She says it is protection charm. Has kept her alive for 70 winters. Now she passes it to you." "I can't take this," Violet protested, trying to give it back, but Ayana closed Violet's fingers around it, spoke again. Apiatan's translation was soft. "She says you are her daughter now. Daughters inherit their mother's protection." Violet's eyes burned with tears she couldn't afford to shed. She pulled the cord over her head, felt the pouch settle against her chest like a second heartbeat. Hugged Ayana fiercely, the old woman's thin arms surprisingly strong in return. No words needed translation for goodbye that might be permanent. The journey to the Box Canyon took 3 hours. They moved carefully, scouts ranging ahead and behind, alert for any sign of Mercer's expedition. But the land remained empty, the morning quiet except for wind and bird calls. The calm before violence, The box canyon was exactly as Apiatan had described. High walls, narrow entrance that could be defended by few against many, spring bubbling up from rock to form a small pool, defensible but not impregnable, a place where determined attackers could eventually break through, but only after paying heavily. Warriors took positions among the rocks overlooking the entrance, their rifles and bows covering every approach. The women and children settled near the spring, as safe as anywhere could be when battle was coming. Violet stood with the warriors, her rifle in hand, the weight of it familiar now. Neshoba was to her left, Takoda to her right, Apiatan at the center coordinating defenses. "They will scout first," Apiatan said, his voice carrying to all the defenders. "They will see our position, count our numbers, report back to Mercer. He will try to negotiate surrender before attacking. He wants to win without losses if possible, will threaten and bluster, and promise mercy if we give up the white woman." His eyes found Violet. "We do not give up anything. We make them come to us." Hours passed. The sun climbed, heat building despite the season. Violet's hands sweated on her rifle, her mouth dry despite drinking from the spring. Waiting was worse than fighting, gave too much time to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Then the scouts appeared, 2 riders on the ridge overlooking the canyon entrance, sitting just at rifle range, observing. They sat for perhaps 10 minutes, clearly counting defenders and assessing the position. Then they wheeled their horses and disappeared. "Now they know," Apiatan said calmly. "Now Mercer decides if we are worth the cost." An hour later they came. Not attacking, not yet. Just a show of force. 29 riders arrayed on the ridge, armed and armored, the sun glinting off rifle barrels and pistol grips. And at their center, mounted on a black horse that must have cost a fortune, was Clayton Mercer. Violet's breath caught. She hadn't seen him since the night she'd run, hadn't allowed herself to picture his face. But there he was, as large and solid and real as her worst nightmares. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. A big man going soft around the middle, face red from sun and anger, eyes that held the certainty of someone who'd never been truly denied anything he wanted. He cupped his hands and shouted, his voice carrying across the distance, "Violet Warren, I know you're down there. This has gone on long enough. You come out now peaceful, and nobody else has to die. You got my word on that." Violet looked at Apiatan, who nodded, her choice whether to respond. She stepped forward where Mercer could see her, raised her voice. "Your word means nothing. You promised to cherish and protect me. You broke that promise on our wedding night." Mercer's face darkened. "What happens between a man and his wife is private business. You belong to me, legal and proper. These savages got no right keeping you." "I don't belong to anyone," Violet called back, and her voice didn't shake. "I'm staying here by choice. These people offered me protection when your law offered me slavery. So no, Clayton, I'm not coming out. You want me, you'll have to come get me. That can be arranged," Mercer snarled. "I got 30 men and all the time in the world. You got what? A dozen Indians and a spring that'll run dry in summer heat. You can't win this." "Maybe not," Violet agreed. "But I can make you regret trying. Every man you lose, that's blood on your hands. Every widow and orphan you create, that's your legacy. Is your pride really worth that cost?" For a moment, just a moment, Violet saw uncertainty flicker across Mercer's face. The realization that he'd underestimated her, that the scared girl he'd married had become something else entirely. Then pride reasserted itself, hardened his expression back to angry certainty. "You got until sunset to change your mind," he said. "After that, we're coming in. And when we do, I promise you'll wish you'd surrendered." The riders withdrew, but not far. They made camp on the ridge, visible and threatening, a constant reminder that violence was just being delayed. Violet watched them through the afternoon, her rifle never far from her hands. She could see Mercer moving among his men, pointing and planning, organizing what would come. "He will attack at dawn," Apiatan predicted. "Night is too dangerous for them, too easy for us to ambush in darkness. Dawn gives them light to shoot by while we are still waking." "So we don't sleep," Neshoba said with a shrug. Not the first time. That night was the longest of Violet's life. Every sound was potential attack. Every shadow was enemy movement. The defenders took shifts, half awake and alert, while half rested. But rest was relative. Violet dozed in fits and starts, her dreams filled with violence that felt more like premonition than imagination. Dawn came too fast and too slow at once. The sun rose blood-red, painting the canyon walls in colors that promised violence. Violet stood at her position, rifle ready, the small knife Apiatan had given her pressing against her ankle. Below, women checked children's hiding places one last time. Warriors checked ammunition counts. Everyone prepared for what came next. Mercer's men appeared on the ridge as the sun cleared the horizon. They'd clearly been awake for hours, preparing for this moment. Violet counted 28 now, one missing, probably sent back for reinforcements or medical help. Still overwhelming numbers against the defenders. For a moment, nothing happened. Both sides just stared at each other across the killing ground, the tension so thick Violet could barely breathe through it. Then Mercer raised his hand, dropped it, and hell came to the canyon. The attackers came in a rush, horses and men pouring down toward the canyon entrance, guns blazing. The defenders opened fire from their elevated positions, bullets and arrows cutting into the charge. Men screamed, horses screamed. The world became nothing but noise and smoke and death. Violet fired until her rifle was empty, reloaded with shaking hands, fired again. She saw men fall, didn't know if her bullets or someone else's had dropped them, didn't care. They were attackers, enemies, and the only thing that mattered was making them stop. The first wave broke against the canyon entrance like water against stone. The narrow passage prevented them from using their numbers, funneled them into a killing zone where defenders had every advantage. Bodies piled up, blood slicked the rocks, the surviving attackers retreated to regroup. "Reload," Apiatan ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Check your positions. They will come again." The second wave came harder, more organized. Mercer had learned from the first assault, changed tactics. Some men dismounted, used rocks for cover, provided suppressing fire while others advanced. Bullets cracked against stone near Violet's head. Neshoba grunted, grabbed his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers, but he kept shooting. All along the line, defenders were taking hits. The third wave nearly broke through. Attackers reached the canyon entrance, took cover behind fallen bodies, started shooting upward. Apiatan led a counterattack, warriors descending to engage in brutal close combat. Violet shot a man who was aiming at Apiatan's back. The man fell. She'd saved Apiatan's life, taken another in the process. The attackers fell back again, leaving more dead. But the defenders had lost too. Takoda was down, drowning in his own blood, while Ayana tried desperately to save him. Mercer's voice carried, "This is your last chance, Violet. Surrender now, I'll let the rest of them live. Your word is worth less than the corpses you're standing on." Violet shouted back. Mercer gestured to his remaining men. 17 now. They mounted for a final all-out assault. "This is it," Apiatan said quietly. "They break through or they break themselves trying." The final charge came like a thunderstorm. 17 men with nothing left to lose. The defenders met them with everything they had left. In the chaos, Violet lost track of the larger battle. A man coming with a pistol, she shot him. Another with a knife, she dodged, and her blade found his ribs. Then suddenly it was over. The attackers were pulling back in panicked rout. She counted only 9 riders escaping. Clayton Mercer was among those fleeing. Silence fell. Violet lowered her rifle, her whole body shaking. She'd survived. They'd survived. "We survived," Apiatan said, his voice heavy. 3 warriors dead, 5 wounded. Victory measured in corpses and trauma. But they'd held. Against overwhelming odds, they'd said no and made it stick. In the days that followed, the camp slowly returned to normal. They buried their dead with honor. Scouts reported Mercer had left Texas entirely, his reputation shattered. Violet stayed. This was where she belonged, where she'd proved herself, where freedom came with responsibility to defend it. One evening, a month after the battle, Violet sat with Apiatan watching the sunset. The world was still broken. Laws were still unjust. But here things were different. Do you regret it? Apiatan asked. Everything you lost to get here, Violet thought carefully. About the scared girl she'd been. About the dangerous woman she'd become. No, I don't regret surviving. I don't regret learning to fight. I don't regret finding people who saw me as human. She looked at him. I regret the world made it necessary. But I don't regret who I became. Apiatan nodded. Good, because that woman will teach the next scared girl that running is possible, that fighting back is possible. They sat as stars emerged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Violet Warren was free and dangerous and alive, and that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.